Welcome to our session today. We are focusing very much on helping you when you have quite a few people in a meeting or in a training session that you are running live online. So I'm your facilitator today. I've been working in learning and development for about 25 years now. I've worked across further and higher education, the charity sector, small businesses, also large businesses like CNN News and Bupa International. I've been the deputy editor of Training Magazine, so I really hope I've got something to help you and draw upon. But I also want to hear from you and learn from your expertise, your experience, and your views as well. I wouldn't be anywhere if I didn't have Mike with us. He's in chat today. He's a business operations manager here at Lightbulb Moment. He also happens to be my brother, which doesn't cause any arguments at all. But we promise we'll be good today. And he is in chat as our producer. So looking forward to having his opinion on things and helping you guys out too. Okay, so let's have a look at what we're doing today. We're going to focus on the challenges of designing live online learning, about replicating face-to-face activities, getting people to actually participate. And after the webinar, if you want to, you can stay on and we'll have question and answer time. Now, all of this is going to be interactive and with plenty of input from you. And we're going to start how we mean to continue. So let's go straight into this question. Now, we've put a new chat box on the screen for you. So if you're on a computer, on a browser, you should be able to look up kind of top left half of the screen, and you should be able to click in there, please. And I'd like to know from you, what is it that you're thinking about why we run activities in our sessions? So this is focusing very much on making sure that we don't just do the chalk and talk thing, or click and spew is something I've heard recently. So this is very much about making sure that we get people involved in our sessions. And why is it that we actually do that? Why do we bother with the activities that take up time? So let's have a look at what it is that we are saying. So Sean says, feedback from the learners. What a great point, Sean, to kick us off with. And you say we need to know where they're at. We do. So that's one of the reasons I've got this question right now. I want to get you involved right from the start and do a good job in that way. But also, this is a really good question, because if you all say, well, we don't need activities, then, that's a very different conversation. But Adam says, change of pace for the learner, for the learning and for the teacher as well. And I think that's really important to think about that change of pace, because sometimes having that pace change is really important to reinvigorate someone or relax someone or tap into them emotionally different. And Carty makes a great point that it's a different voice as well. So sometimes Mike will deliver more of what we're doing. Or if we were in a virtual classroom, we'd get you guys talking. We're in a webinar today, so we'll keep it in chat. Naomi says to gain engagement from learners and break up the monotony of a person talking at the learners. Oh, Naomi, how brilliant. And that talking at the learners, that's not what we want to do. We want to make sure we're focusing on the humans that are with us. And Tracy says to ensure learner engagement. Absolutely, Tracy, because that learner engagement makes a really important session, a really good learning experience for everybody joining. And quite frankly, it's more interesting and better for me as well as a facilitator, or for you when you're facilitating. And Sean says they can be fun and mix things up. They absolutely can. And Adam adds, yes, different voices, like in a breakout room, it can be good instead of just the teacher. Absolutely. Now, whilst, as a teacher, you'll do a great job, but having a conversation with another person who's more on a level with you, rather than the kind of supposed power that we have as the facilitator, that can be a very different kind of conversation. So you've got absolutely great points there, everybody. Thank you for all of those. We'll do many more of those questions, I promise you. So we know that activities in our sessions, whether they're face-to-face or live online, all help our attendees to learn, to remember, and most importantly, to perform later. Engagement and experiences also give us valuable feedback as a facilitator that can assist in how we deliver the rest of our session. And we know that activities are really important in our sessions. Yet often we hear from clients we speak to or trainers attending our learning modules that they've cut out a lot, if not all of the activities from their live online sessions. So I've got another question for you. Let's jump to that chat window, that new one that's on screen. We've just said people are sometimes removing these activities. So, what are the challenges that you are facing in designing and facilitating your live online activities? That's what I'd like to know, because there are challenges. Of course, there are challenges. Um, and I'd like to know a little bit more about that from your point of view, because if people are cutting those activities, there's a reason. So, what are you thinking? What are the challenges you are facing, or you've heard people facing, or your colleagues are facing? So Kati says, time to do it. I hear you, Kati. And it does take time. It takes time to learn our technology beyond the basics so that we can really make the most of whatever platform we've got. Today, we're using Adobe Connect, and it gives us this great option to have a second chat window. And in another platform, you don't have that. So we have to know what's going on in our software, in what we have access to. So we do appreciate it takes time, but if we don't invest that time, either personally in our own skills or from an organizational perspective in the skills of our team and the development, then quite frankly, the training isn't going to be as good as it could be. And Adam says the same thing, time. We just don't have enough to update everything. I hear you, Adam. And we're in the same position. Mike and I get to choose to do exactly what we want every day, and we have the same problem. And so sometimes it's about prioritizing, sometimes it's about doing a little bit and doing enough rather than the perfectionist thing that a lot of us kind of fall into. But we also do hear that. That's why things like upskilling in places like this hopefully is time well spent for you. Carty also adds that it's how to actually do those activities live online. And sometimes when we've been doing things face to face for years, and we've got a particular activity, it can be a little bit difficult to know how to do that live online. Some things work really well. If it's talk to the neighbour next to you, maybe use private chat. If it's group activity, well, we have breakout rooms. But some activities are more complicated and they can be a little bit more difficult to think, well, how can I convert them to make the most of the activity and the learning points, but also not get too complicated in the activity? Sean says, knowing the tech well enough to do them or write them or deliver them. Absolutely, Sean. And that's a really key point, that you do need to know your tech well. You don't have to be a technology expert, but you do have to know it well enough to write the session that you want. Naomi says, finding activities which can be done online, which has an equivalent outcome to the face-to-face activity. Really great point. Now, sometimes the activity can be completely different live online, or it can be kind of different enough so that it works. But that equivalent outcome is really important. That's the bit to focus on. Adam says, getting my head around it, and the team also. Sometimes it takes a long time just to think how to replicate it online. Absolutely, Adam. And we like to try and keep things as simple as possible. So sometimes if you just start with, well, how do I do it face to face? And what's the easiest way I could do that? I'm like, could I just do it in chat? Could we do breakout rooms? Could we use a poll and chat or something like that? And just focusing on those real simple elements can help. And Sean says to Naomi, we have the same. How will we get the same learning outcome? So you're absolutely not alone with those kind of worries and those kind of challenges. And we've experienced those too. And from having time to design things to knowing the best practice of what to do and the right way to use the technology, you've covered all of those things. Obviously, we'll explore those things with you. But first of all, let's find out a little bit about you and your role in your learning or performance and what's brought you here today. So It could be a trainer, a manager, a coordinator, a digital learning specialist, HR business partner. All parts of the organization use virtual events these days. So let me take you to a poll. Go and have a click on here, please. So, how many years have you been doing this kind of people development work, whatever it is that you are involved in? So, please go and select how many years that is for you. And I'll go and share those results so you can see. So we've got actually quite a broad range, everything from just a few years through to 15 years plus. So we've got a broad range of experience here, which is absolutely wonderful. And now what I want to do, I'm going to change up the question on you and I'm going to add a second poll. How many years have you been working live online with virtual classrooms? So that's my second question. So, how many years have you been doing the virtual classroom thing? That's my question now. So go and click on that on screen, please. Now, a lot of people have only been doing this since the global pandemic, which we completely understand. And that's showing kind of similar here. Some people have been doing it longer. Look, somebody's at 7 to 9 years, Michael. Wow, it's almost as long as me. I've been doing this 10 years. So absolutely brilliant that you are sharing that. And this tells me, if we compare and contrast those two polls that we've got there, that we might have years or in some case decades of experience working face to face, but for most of us working live online is much newer thing that we're doing. So that's always really interesting to take into account, because if I've been doing this for 10 years, and I tell you what I did year one compared to what I do now, they are totally different. If you could ever see my first class, I hope there is not a recording of that somewhere, because it was awful. And if you want to be great at anything, then a year or two isn't a long time compared to the experience we have in other areas of our work. So, we are looking here at developing additional skills to really help unlock your experience for great live online design and delivery. And we get a lot of these questions. We're going to dig into this detail. One of the most common questions we have, and you brought it up earlier on, is how do I replicate a face to face activity for live online? If you look at our community forum, it's scattered with these. And it's a question I'm sure you've heard in the office or posed yourself before. So let me ask you this question, and we'll put a new box up on the screen for you. For activities that you have replicated from your face to face sessions, did they work as expected? So, those activities where you went, okay, I've got to do a version of this live online, did they actually work as you wanted to? So, what are you thinking? Did they kind of work really well? Did you get the right design elements all together? A bit hit and miss or abject failure? Let us know in that chat window. Carty says, sometimes, depending on the complexity. I'm not surprised, Carty. I'm great that they work sometimes. And Carty, I think you mentioned that complexity piece kind of earlier on. And I think that's really important. Oh, you said yes, you did. Really important that when we think about this, we need to build our skills and experience. And did they work as expected? And Zara's just put, nope. Zara, I'm sorry, but your two exclamation points says to me that you're approaching that with humor. So I'm hoping that's okay. And sometimes they don't work. Mike and I will tell you the times we've done something and it hasn't worked. On one of our courses, we've got a whole activity that is based on an activity I wrote that was just way too over the top. It just didn't work. So an abject failure there from me. Now, Naomi says usually it takes more time as needs more explicit instruction around how to do it. Such a great point, Naomi. So many face-to-face trainers, especially with 10, 15, 20 years experience, can do a version of give me some bullet points. I'll go into a morning's training session, a day's training session, and I will rock it because I know my stuff. But live online, there's other moving parts that are newer to us that can feel like a barrier, even though they're bringing us together. So that more explicit instruction is really important. Really glad you brought that up, Naomi. Thank you. Adam says sometimes they did, but the complex ones not so much. So you're with CAR-T as well. And that's a little bit about the tools. It's a little bit about experience. And it's a lot about, is it the right kind of design? Sean saying similar, simple ones, yes, brainstorm, etc. Maybe 2 breakouts, for example, which is great. And Sean adds, often we would get deep into design trying to replicate and just give up because it's just over the top online tech-wise. That's a great point, Sean, and something I've done myself as well, is you've got all this shiny tech and you throw all the bells and whistles in because it can do stuff, but that's not necessarily what's right. And that over the top bit, I can certainly feel your pain. So that's why that simplicity point is one we kind of advocate. And Adam's saying the same, actually, we keep it simple for virtual delivery. Tech we know, and the learners know they can use it. And that's a really important point, because I think, as I've said before, starting with our face-to-face experience and those activities is a great place to be, because what we're looking at is that if we think about those polls earlier on, many of us have got much more experience face-to-face, and our brains naturally look for shortcuts and to make our life easier. So we always recommend people start their design with what they have the most experience of, which is, well, what would you do in a physical classroom? And then it's easier to consider how the platform technology functions compared to what we might do in our face-to-face sessions. So on screen are some just fundamental ideas about understanding how face-to-face activities might work live online. But we found in our training modules, it really helps our participants to quickly start to put the pieces together in understanding not just how to potentially design an activity, but how it will be facilitated virtually. Sean says in chat, over the top is more that it takes a long time to explain and write into the session. So similar to what Naomi was saying, is that detail of the session that you have to write down, as well as that explanation. I understand, Sean, because any more than a couple of minutes and you're thinking, oh gosh, how complicated is this? And I think that kind of process of simplicity is hard on us, but when it works, we can kind of really get it there. Now, taking this a step further and understanding our tools and platforms more helps us to start designing activities that have got good learning in mind, but also utilizing the best of the platform and not just trying to find an equivalent tool from what we did face to face. Adam says in chat, yes, when we started, we did not write enough into the lesson plan for exactly what to do and when. I like that, Adam, because actually a lot of people, when they're doing virtual or as it is now hybrid stuff, they don't think enough from different perspectives. What's the learner doing? What's their experience, for example? And they don't think enough about the detail of what to click, when, and what's happening. So I really love that you've shared that experience, and hopefully that will help someone else, Adam. Thank you. Now, in our community, we had someone ask how to replicate an activity where the face-to-face class would be split into groups of 2. They would then need to do a counting exercise, taking turns to count, but not talking over each other. So one would say 1, one would say 2, one would say 3, and so on. They would come back together as a group when they were face-to-face, debrief how hard or easy it was, and then go back and do the same, but with more complicated steps gradually added. Now, one of the key takeaways, the learning outcomes from this exercise, is that change isn't easy, but once you've started with a small change, it's easier to continue adding small changes to that. So I'd like you to think about that tool equivalence kind of point that we just made from face-to-face activities and running them live online. So for this question, this activity in our community forum, how might you replicate this live online? So you had groups of pairs of people doing the numbers thing one at a time, come back together and go, whew, that was hard. Then go back into their pairs, add a few steps which are more complicated, come back together and debrief, and so on. So it's actually a little bit of a challenging thing to think, how are we going to replicate this live online? Naomi says breakout rooms, yeah, which also Sean and Tracy are saying as well. And Sean says potentially a lot of them. Yeah, if you wanted people in pairs, if you've got 10 people, that's easy. If you've got 40 people, that's a little bit more. So there's kind of various different things that we can do. And I think breakout rooms are the main option. And Adam's saying maybe having more people in each breakout room. So that's kind of an interesting way as well. There's always different ways that we can do these things. And breakout rooms, as you've said, is the logical answer. Now, for this activity, we would need to ensure everyone has got webcams and microphones, which is usually pretty standard for our breakout rooms. But of course, it depends on your audience. It depends on their location and the work that they're doing. So that's not always a standard. We also need to think about having maybe 2 people in each breakout room, maybe more, as Adam said. And then we need to bring them back to the main room after each step for a debrief, the next set of instructions, and then kind of go again. Now, this activity design shows that it's really good to start with the question, how would I do this face-to-face? And then think about our live online platform tools to achieve that, as we mentioned earlier. Now, we know that breakout rooms could work to put people into pairs, but actually, is this the best solution? Is it the best design? What this trainer actually did was to have him and one other person do the activity, but also with the whole group. So everyone else was also on webcam and followed some of the actions as they went, so they weren't excluded. Now, this was much simpler than multiple breakout rooms and all the time and all the effort that would take. This is an important point about design. And I want to share an example from a participant on our training called James. Now, in a session one day about activities, James shared his example of taking an activity from a face-to-face session and making it work live online. He worked in a sales training, and this session was about different scenarios clients might have and helping the salespeople to find the right product and solution to those challenges. In physical sessions, attendees would work on their own with these client scenarios on printed cards with blank spaces. They also had some solutions that had been printed and out, and they'd been cut up as well. And they had to pop a bit of glue on these, put them on the appropriate scenario cards. Then the facilitator would share the answers and they would briefly discuss any mismatches. All good so far. Now, the way that James made this work for live online was by having a Word document he emailed out to the attendees. They also emailed an Excel document labeled with the different drop-down options that they could copy and paste into the Word document. People would be put into breakout rooms on their own and work on the Word document. Now, breakout rooms on your own sounds a bit weird, but it's a really nice technique for some activities. Then the facilitators would go in each room to check that people were working okay. It's that private one-to-one conversation. It's really cool. The participants then had to email the Word document back to the facilitator once they had finished. Now, Adam, you're saying that sounds like a lot. That's an interesting that you say that, because I'd like you to tell me what you're thinking about this. I mean, you've pretty much said it already, Adam and Sean, by saying that sounds like a lot. And it is kind of interesting. What's the word I'm looking for? When we start looking at this in retrospect and we start dissecting this later. Because I think it's something, James was really proud that he'd done this, and rightly so. He'd got a solution to the problem. He was very techy. He was a lovely person. But as Adam says, there's lots of steps. Kati says difficult. And Sean says many different bits of tech being used at the same time. You're absolutely right. You've got Word, you've got Excel, you've got individual breakouts, you've got one facilitator going to those individuals, which if you've got 3 or 4 people is easy, 10 people is okay, 20 or 30 people, suddenly that's taking a lot of time. And Tracy says, like the idea, dot, dot, dot. And I'm reading a lot into that dot, 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 Tracy. That it's kind of like, well, there's a good concept, but has it been done well? Naomi said, I've already gone to get a coffee because I got distracted just listening to those steps. Yep. Okay. I hear you, everybody. I hear you. And we kind of felt the same way as well. It took James many days to work out the technical elements and how that would work. And we haven't even factored into this that he also had to write a lot of details in the facilitator guide to explain it to the people delivering, as well as make the instructions for the participants as well. So if you're thinking that this is a bit convoluted, then you're spot on and you are absolutely not alone. What we did with James, gently, is we discussed an alternative solution where we suggested to use something like Padlet or Jamboarder, a nice simple kind of online post-it note wall, if you like. It could be set up ahead of time with the appropriate scenarios, the options and everything, just like face-to-face. And all the attendees would have to do is move the boxes of content around. That's the equivalent of gluing down the bits that have been cut up. We also suggested that actually doing this activity in small groups would improve the learning through sharing experiences, through discussing options, getting people's different opinions and experience and all that kind of stuff. And then there was potentially more time for debriefing and sharing that learning. Now, when we consider an activity that's face-to-face versus live online, we have to consider what makes it memorable. In the case with James, we thought people would find struggling on their own with the scenarios and the technology would be the focus rather than the clients and those right solutions and the products, which was the whole point. What we want to share here is that James focused on replicating the face-to-face experience rather than redesigning it. He did a digital copy of the physical workflow, which caused a lot of work and was long-winded. However, if he designed the activity fresh using digital options, it would have flowed better. Sean says in chat, not doing that in groups is quite binary also. You either get it correct or wrong. Absolutely. And more often than not, we find that it's actually in the discussion, especially with people who have had different experiences or views, where you can say, well, no, because I had a client once that did X or had X or said X. That's where the discussion is really rich and the learning comes from. So I love what you're saying there, Sean. And this isn't about James and the work that he'd put in. He'd done a great job. This is about learning to do an even better job that makes it easier for everyone. There are things that make the replicated activity, quite frankly, not work very well, including the workflow, what attendees do when they get lost in the activity, and the effect on the debrief. Sometimes replicating an activity can technically meet our requirements for the equivalent face-to-face session, but it does make the activity maybe different. So is it better? Is it actually right for our virtual audience? Focusing on when we need to achieve the learning point in our session means that whilst we end up with some pretty cool stuff that we do live online, actually sometimes it's easier and smoother workflow for both the facilitator and the participant if we've redesigned it a little bit. Adam says in chat, but if you need to know that they understand for, say, compliance reasons, sometimes it's better to do that way. Absolutely, Adam. This is about what's the learning outcome. What is it you need to prove? And if you need them to do some kind of written version of a document to prove that they can go and sell that product, then absolutely understand that. But could they do that with a screen grab of our version differently? Could they do that by filling in a form that you do afterwards? It's thinking about that in a slightly different way. But to your point, Adam, knowing what it is you want to achieve is absolutely the most important thing. Thank you. So let's have a chat on this. We'd love to know what you're thinking after exploring this replicate versus redesign point. Perhaps your activities are all replicated easily, which is great. Or maybe this is inspiring you to explore more appropriate virtual tools. So, how can you simplify your virtual activity design but still achieve the learning outcomes? Have a think. So, think about your activities. And some of you said they've worked really well in the past, and some of you said perhaps they haven't. How might you simplify your design and still achieve the learning outcome? So that's a relatively meaty question. And I'm not expecting you to have every exact answer right now. But what are you thinking? You think, this has made me consider this. Maybe for my next activity, maybe for my next session that I want to look at. So Zara said using better tech and going to look at Padlet. That's brilliant, Zara. And Padlet's just one of many tools out there. It's one that we like. And we like it because it's quite cheap. There's also a free option you can try. It's got limited but diverse options for the kind of collaboration you want to do. The main reason we use it is that people don't need to register an account on it. As long as you set up the access settings and the privacy and that correctly, I can just give you a link and you can go and post something on there if you want to. Things like Mural and Miro, people need to create an account, and we just didn't want that extra step. Sean says, not dropping the tech because it's complicated, but finding better tech. Love that, Sean, because anything live online is going to be tech. It has to be, because that's what's bringing us together. But can we do something in chat or breakout rooms better than this complicated thing that James was doing, for example, with all the Word and Excel documents? So it is about finding that right level of tech and not overcomplicating it, like you said earlier on. Carty says, I like the concept of redesign. We'll do that now, I think. Thank you, Carty. And we definitely need to do that. Start with what would we do face to face, start with how would that work, and that's where we can start our thinking, which can really help us. But then after that, it's not just slavishly doing the same thing because that's what we've always done. It can be really easy to do that. We all do it all the time. Our brain needs shortcuts. We need to preserve energy, all of those things. It's a good thing to do. So we need to be effortful and just think, how could I, if I was going to redesign this from scratch, would I do a different activity? Would I make that work differently? It's a great point, Carty. Thank you. Adam says, perhaps breaking down harder activities into smaller chunks live online, breakout discussion, whiteboard brainstorm, then a poll or something. It has the main elements, but chunked down for live online. Oh, Adam, I'm loving that. One of the things that we talk about in, I think it's module 2 of our training, is that actually all of these small interactions could be green ticks, could be something in chat, or the more medium-sized interactions, if you like, such as a whiteboard brainstorm and a breakout room discussion, they all build up. So you're absolutely right. I think a lot of the time when we think about activities, we think about the 20-minute or the 1 hour or the whole morning of achieving X. But actually breaking it down into those smaller component pieces is actually much better for learning outcome design and for the tech part of it as well. Naomi says, maybe think about how I can achieve the outcome in a few different ways to pick the best way to do it. Naomi, that is inspired. We sometimes do that. We kind of go, okay, how about we do design A? They're like, yeah, that could work for this reason, or it's a bit challenging there, or maybe for a different group. Now we never lose design A. We just put that to one side, and maybe that's right for another project or another program. So actually that flexing your design skills and getting to the right one is really good. We call it the thing that gets us to the thing. So it's just like my idea might be rubbish, but then it will spark something for Mike. And then his idea won't be quite right. It's maybe a bit complicated, but I can simplify it this way and we come up with something else. So all of that is really good. And sometimes we use those ideas in different places as well. So no bad thing there, Naomi. Thank you. Adam says redesign is essential. I think I've had many issues trying to replicate. Absolutely, Adam. And I think probably more often than not, it needs to be at redesign. I think only simplistic stuff is easy to replicate. And Adam says, like others have said, what is the learning point and what route to get there, but with a different activity virtually? Thank you, Adam. And Naomi says, scaffolding ideas. Love it. Absolutely. It's all about the scaffolding. Okay. So you've come up with some absolutely great stuff here, some really good suggestions and really good concepts and discussion. What we're focusing on with this discussion is finding an activity that might be different live online, but achieves the same learning result, exactly as Adam said. And by focusing on the learning outcome, we look a bit more objectively about the technology that we might select and open up additional possibilities for the live online activity and how it can run better with virtual. So let me ask you another question. Once we have our virtual design, we need to focus on getting people to actually participate. I ran some polls on social media, and one of the biggest challenges people said was they found was actually getting people to join in with the activity. So I've put a tick in and cross up on screen for you to have a look at. It's at the top right hand side of your screen. And please go and have a click on the tick if you think, yep, getting people to participate is challenging. Or click on the X if you think, actually, in my sessions, it's been okay. I haven't had too much of a problem. So green tick here, yep, it's a challenge to get people interacting and getting involved in the activities. Or the red X if you can, actually, for me, for my sessions, it's not been too bad. So I'm just seeing in chat that Mike and Sean are having a great conversation about the idea of failing. Of learning is failure, as it is, learning from failure. But that idea of a minimum viable product in the tech industry of like, let's just do something, test it, go. And Sean says, that's a good point. I'll say that to my manager in his defense. That's brilliant, Sean. So roughly 2/3 of you are saying, yeah, actually, we have struggle to get people to participate. And if you don't struggle, then that's absolutely brilliant. Really pleased for you. But I'd like to know what is the kind of the challenge with this. So let me put this poll up on screen. And even if you said, actually, sometimes I don't have these problems, then maybe sometimes you do in some places, but not in others. So have a think about some of your sessions, and are there any particular reasons and one primary reason where you think actually this is maybe why they don't get involved? And Adam says in chat, yeah, actually I put a green tick, but they nearly always do the activity. It might just be me thinking, was it actually a good activity they did? Oh, Adam, that is so reflective. So yeah, this is specifically more about getting them to do it. But I love your thinking about, was it the right activity? Did they get the most out of it? So we'll come back to this conversation in just a moment. So what are some of your answers? We've got a few key ones coming out. Things like people's age and poor activity design. They seem to be the biggest ones. Oh, you're changing your mind now. Fair enough. But sometimes it's people think they know stuff already. So these are kind of some interesting kind of issues. There's all sorts of reasons. Naomi says they could be reluctance to put themselves out there online with a camera or voice. Oh, that is such a challenge. And I think for a lot of organizations where they're enforcing the use of cameras, that can be a challenge. Now, this is a good question to ask ourselves and reflect on after the webinar, and Adam's doing that already. Because the reason that people don't get involved can help us focus on what the key challenge is to getting that attendee engagement in our sessions for our clients or for our organization. I'm also going to challenge you a little bit further with this because it can be really easy to look at these external factors as to why people aren't participating in activities. But actually, there's an obvious element that we play a role in this too. Now, I've run, well over 1,000 live online sessions. I've got a huge bank of activities that went really well. And of course, more than I care to admit, that went pretty badly too. The way I improved was with reflection, was with practice, self-development, feedback, and so on. Now, let's see how what we do can impact on our participants. As today is a webinar, I haven't done learning activities in the same way as I would with just a handful of us on a more focused virtual classroom. But this has still been an interactive learning opportunity. So we're going to consider engagement. As an attendee here today, have you wanted to get involved? Why or why not? So think about the session today. Have you wanted to get involved in these chat questions and these polls? And if you have or haven't, let us know why. What are you thinking? Now, this isn't compliment Joe time. This is thinking about what motivates me, what inspires me, what has made me kind of drop the email and get involved in something, and what can I take away from this to help my own design and my own learners. So why or why not? That's key. What are you thinking in terms of getting involved today? Have you wanted to get involved? And if you haven't, that's fine and understandable. And the important bit is why or why not? So Carty says yes, but there's always a but, Carty. I hate the but. Yes, but I'm doing email too. Completely understand, Carty. And I'm sure other people are in a similar situation. And I always say, you know what, we've got adult learners, and especially on something like a webinar, quite frankly, I'd expect you to be multitasking and doing other things. Maybe it's low level stuff. Maybe you're churning through the millions of emails you've got rather than necessarily, writing that big report and focusing on that. But we understand that's the reality. And you put yes, that's the reality of working life at the moment. And Sean says, yes, it's an interesting topic and chats to be had. Thank you, Sean. And Zara says, of course, and wanting to learn. Tracy says, yes, I really want to learn how to improve on what I do. And Naomi says, yes, because you personalize it by reacting and commenting on every input which we have. And I think that's a really important thing, Naomi. I'm glad you've picked up on that. And Tracy as well on that improvement piece. And now this is a quieter webinar today. If we had 500 people here, I might not be quoting every single bit in chat. Certainly that's a more challenging experience. But being able to pick out things and add value or change the conversation is really important. Adam says there's been something to gain in sharing and getting involved with others' comments. It felt like we're in the same boat here today. I don't know if that was the question or how you facilitated, Joe. I'm not sure, Adam, but the point is you gained something and you got involved with other people, and that social learning is so important. And I like the point you make about being in the same boat. With any problem we have in work or life, one of the biggest problems is when we feel alone, when we feel it's just us and just our fault. And the reason that forums, Facebook groups, self-help therapy groups, whatever it might be, are so popular is that we don't feel alone. We feel in the same boat, and that really helps. So thank you for that, Adam. And Sean says, I often don't get involved that much on webinars, but there seems to be a small group today, easier to kind of know the people here, if that makes sense. Absolutely makes sense, Sean. It's a really great point. We've been talking a lot with one of our clients recently over the modules that we've trained them on. And our third module is all about connecting with human beings and managing the group through digital body language and stuff like that. One of the key things we say to them when you're running a virtual classroom, and we say that's up to 10 or 12 people, let's say, is that when you finish that hour or 2 hours, that if you can come away and say something about everybody that was there, it means you've connected with them as real people. So Sean, I can come away and say, you know what, Sean was really focused on that human connection. So I know you. And that's what you're picking up on, Sean, which I think is really special and really important. And it does only work in well facilitated smaller sessions, less so on, you know, the 500 person webinar or something like that. So great comments, everyone. So this is about connecting with people we have with us live, not just running an activity because that's what we had face to face, or so that we can tick a box to say, yep, my session has got interactions. We've got another free webinar where we look at this human connection in more detail. We'll have links at the end so you can go and catch that if you want to. Today, I've used fairly basic tools like chat and polls. But what I have done is designed from the very beginning to laser focus on questions that I think and hope might actually be important to you and will have an impact on what you do afterwards. The questions hopefully promote discussions, exactly like you just said, and learning from others. And Adam put in earlier on that, you know, this whole reflection point as well. And that will help you plan or think differently when you go to your next session. And Adam says, for sure, I think so. Thank you, Adam. Now, this is some stuff that we cover in our Module 2 training, which is all about improving your activities. This is technology best practice to keep in mind and go through with each of our activities. Things like, well, if you're doing an activity now with Padlet, have you taught that tool? Have you used it before? Do we need you to use multiple tools together? Maybe not like James with his Word and Excel, but you know, there might be times that you need to do that. And there's a whole load of other things. Making sure that these elements of our activities work is really important, but it can be easy to be distracted by that technology. Adam says in chat, it's clear that you've really thought about the right question to ask to get us to think about what you've said before. Thank you, Adam. Really appreciate that. Mike and I spend a lot of time doing this. I'll be honest, there's been a couple of arguments, but on a genuine note, you know, sometimes we kind of ask a question and the feedback we get or the answers we get is not quite what we were expecting. So sometimes we have to think, did we ask the right question? Is that there for the sake of it really? Or does it help you kind of get deep and meaningful in your brain? So thank you, Adam. That's nice of you to say. When we're focusing on this why element, when we're focusing on the technology, it can be easy to get distracted. And this can all dilute the learning point and move us away from that great question, move us away from the human connection element with our participants. You know, just think back to poor James and what he was doing to replicate that face-to-face activity. We do have to have a dual focus. We have to focus on the how of a virtual activity, but we also need to focus on the why. Naomi says, yes, technology can be such a distraction. I'm living with the academics. I'm living that with the academics who are needing to teach in a hybrid classroom. Hybrid is really hard, Naomi. Naomi, if you haven't downloaded our hybrid case study already, I'm going to get Mike to share a link with that to that in chat, if you can. Naomi says they are more concerned about the technology rather than redesigning their teaching. Oh, Naomi, it's a journey to go on. And hopefully, you know, you're helping them out a lot on that journey. But something like this example, I think, it really highlights that challenge that we have. So when we're focusing on the why element, we need to ensure we don't miss the essential elements in our design of, first of all, is this actually good learning? Is it engaging? Will people actually connect with the group and myself? And lastly, is it fun? And maybe fun isn't appropriate in some places, but you could kind of say, is that engaging? Is it appropriate? Is it enjoyable? Is it motivating? Is it inspiring? Does it bring out an emotional response in people? So you can interpret that one a little bit how you need to. Sean says hybrid is really tough. It seems like it should be easy, but when we tried it, it was really tough. Sean, I hear you. I hear you. Definitely go and have a look at that report, Sean, that case study, because it was, I worked with Laura Overton, who you might know from Towards Maturity, and she's just released a CIPD report actually as well. And we rethought and redesigned a hybrid conference to make it really good. But it was hard work. It was a challenge. And I think people underestimate it, like you say. So our pleasure, Naomi. Okay. Thank you, Sean, as well. Now, if you can answer yes to all or most of these questions that I've just shared with you, then you're following good practice. It will become far easier to get all of your participants involved with your activities and improve the chance of achieving your learning outcomes. Now we've gone through quite a few different elements of engaging activities today. I'm going to summarize to just a couple of points, share some resources, and then it will be time for questions. Now, I think there are two big themes to take away from today, but you can let me know in chat what your themes are. Firstly, do we know what best practice is? Is it documented somewhere in your organization? Perhaps as observation forms, checklists, or templates that you can use to save you time, to that point we had with the challenge earlier on. And secondly, reflect upon whether we're actually connecting with our audience on that human level and promoting a connection with us as a facilitator and with each other in the learning process. I can honestly say that with the experience you have already, best practice in mind, and the attitude to really connect with your participants, and Naomi, I know you're working hard on that with your academics, then the majority of the hard work is done and your sessions will improve. Now, if you would like to improve in those areas and more, we've got both free and paid for solutions available, all based on our experience of focusing purely on upskilling organizations in live online learning since 2013. There's a free community for you to go and ask questions and all sorts of resources for supporting your development needs. We also have completely redesigned and modernized our virtual classroom course for our post-pandemic world. We've got 3 modules that you can pick and choose how to build your best learning offering to meet your needs. And you can also tailor this with other additional training. And Adam, I love your point here about redesign, not replicate. I think it's a key one for me today. I kind of knew it already, but this has highlighted it more. And Adam, anything that you go on, webinar, podcast, chat with someone down the pub, whatever it might be, if it reinforces what you know, if it reignites what you know and gives you more confidence, I think that's pretty awesome. We've also invested a lot of time in what we call our course hub area for our modules. There's pre-work, post-work, all sorts of resources specific to the training that we deliver. And it means we can dedicate more of our live sessions to fantastic conversations. And the course hub area has all the resources that your team might need even after a module finishes. Now, we've made a mini course hub for you for content relevant to today's webinar, and I'll share a link with you in a moment. You get that kind of same feeling as to what it would be like on our training modules. So what is next for you? Well, what we are kind of looking at here, I know I'll say thank you in a second. There we go. So what is next for you? You can click on these big yellow boxes and big orange boxes that we've got on the screen at the bottom left. So what we've got there are things like if you want to discuss our training modules and think, yeah, actually they're ones we need, you can click on that and arrange a chat and see how we can help you. If you're thinking, well, I'm not really sure about that at the moment, I just want to stay informed about what's going on in the world of Lightbulb Moment, Well, just sign up to our newsletter. And if you're thinking, actually, what I really want is the community and want some free resources, you can click on that. And you've got that mini hub experience for resources related to today's topics as well. And then if you have any questions, if you need any help with anything, if you want to get involved with that community, we've got that available to you as well. Okay, so that is everything I wanted to go through today. And hopefully that has helped you out. It's got you thinking. Adam says you've got to run. No problem, Adam. I'm going to stop the recording now and we're going to move into Q&A time. So if you had a burning question you didn't want to ask on a recording, you've got time to do that now. Thank you everyone for getting involved.